The weary sergeant slumped against the airport wall, her military duffel bag serving as her only pillow for what would now be a night spent on the cold terminal floor. Just 20 minutes earlier, Jessica Matthews had watched her flight to her sister's wedding depart without her, all because she'd stopped to help an elderly man who had collapsed near the security checkpoint, staying with him until medical help arrived. The other passengers had rushed past, annoyed at the commotion, and focused only on making their connections. No one noticed the thin man in the rumpled suit observing the entire scene from the corner of the terminal, his weathered hands gripping an expensive leather briefcase bearing the airline's executive emblem. His eyes never left the soldier as she surrendered her seat to remain with a stranger in distress. What would happen when the airline's reclusive billionaire owner revealed his true identity to the woman who'd missed the most important day of her sister's life to help him? Jessica Matthews checked her watch for the 5th time in as many minutes. 8:47 p.m. Her flight to Minneapolis had departed 17 minutes ago, taking with it her last chance to make it to her sister's wedding rehearsal tomorrow evening. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through the airline's app again, searching for any available flights, but the results remained unchanged from her last dozen attempts. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but with the snowstorms across the Midwest, everything's booked solid," the gate agent had told her an hour earlier, genuine sympathy in her eyes. "We can get you on standby for tomorrow afternoon's flight, but I can't make any promises." Jessica ran her fingers through her short brown hair, still not quite used to its civilian length after years of military regulation cuts. 3 tours in Afghanistan, and she couldn't manage to make it to her own sister's wedding on time. The irony wasn't lost on her. She pulled up her sister's contact and pressed call, dreading the conversation to come. After 3 rings, Melissa's excited voice answered, "Jess, are you at your layover? Will you be here soon?" Jessica closed her eyes, leaning her head back against the cold terminal wall. "Mel, I'm so sorry. I missed my connection." The silence on the other end spoke volumes. "What happened? Can you get another flight?" "I tried. Everything's booked because of weather." Jessica omitted the real reason she'd missed her flight. What was the point in explaining? It wouldn't change anything. "I'm on standby for tomorrow afternoon, but even if I make that one, I'll miss the rehearsal dinner. But you'll still make the wedding, right?" The tremor in Melissa's voice made Jessica's chest tighten. "I'm going to do everything I can, I promise." She swallowed hard. "I'm so sorry, Mel." After promising to keep her sister updated, Jessica ended the call and surveyed her surroundings. Terminal B would be her home for the night. She wasn't the only stranded passenger. Several others had already claimed corners and chairs, settling. In for an uncomfortable night, Jessica was no stranger to sleeping in less than ideal conditions. 3 deployments had taught her to rest whenever and wherever possible. She unzipped her duffel bag, pulling out a sweatshirt to use as a makeshift pillow. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a thin elderly man in an expensive-looking suit watching her from across the terminal. He'd been there earlier too, she realized, when she'd helped the other elderly gentleman who had collapsed. There was something about his focused gaze that made her uneasy, not threatening exactly, but intensely observant. When their eyes met, briefly, he didn't look away as most people would. Instead, he gave her a small, knowing nod before turning to speak to a younger man in a dark suit standing beside him. Jessica shrugged it off. Airports were full of strange characters, and she had bigger problems. She checked her phone again, still no available flights. She sent a quick text to her parents explaining the situation, then set an alarm for 5 a.m. Maybe she could sweet-talk her way onto an early flight if there were any no-shows. As the terminal lights dimmed for the night, Jessica pulled her military-issued jacket tighter around her shoulders. The familiar weight and smell of it was comforting, a small piece of the structure she'd grown accustomed to over her years of service. In the morning, she'd figure something out. She always did. Across the terminal, the elderly man was still, watching, his phone now pressed to his ear, his expression unreadable in the dim light. Harold Winters observed the young woman from his vantage point across the terminal. At 78, he had learned that people rarely noticed an elderly man unless he wanted them to. It was a kind of invisibility that had served him well over the decades, allowing him to witness genuine human behavior when people thought no one important was watching. "That's her?" asked Gregory, his personal assistant of 15 years. "Yes," Harold confirmed, his eyes never leaving the soldier who had settled against the wall with her duffel bag. "Sergeant Jessica Matthews, 29 years old, 3 tours, in Afghanistan with the Army's 10th Mountain Division." Gregory glanced down at his tablet. "How did you get her information so quickly?" "I own an airline, Gregory," Harold replied with a hint of amusement. "Passenger manifests aren't exactly state secrets to me." What truly interested Harold wasn't just her military service, though that alone would have caught his attention. It was what he had witnessed earlier, the moment that had changed both their evenings. He had been making his quarterly anonymous inspection of Midwest Air's customer service operations, something he'd done for decades without fanfare or announcement, when he saw the elderly gentleman collapse near the security checkpoint. Before Harold could even react, the young woman in uniform had dropped her bags and rushed to the man's side. While other passengers stepped around them, annoyed at the obstruction, she had stayed, helping the man into a sitting position, checking his pulse, calling for medical assistance. Harold had watched as she spoke calmly to the distressed man, holding his hand until paramedics arrived. "She missed her flight because of it," Harold said quietly. "Yes, sir. Flight 1372 to Minneapolis. Her final destination is Rochester for her sister's wedding." Harold nodded slowly, the wheels turning in his mind. "And what did you find out about the man she helped?" "Mr. Cooper is stable. Appears to have been dehydration and low blood sugar. They're keeping him overnight for observation, but he should be fine." "Good. That's good." Harold continued watching Jessica as she checked her phone, her face illuminated by the screen's glow in the dimming terminal lights. Something about her reminded him of another soldier from another time. The way she had acted without hesitation, putting a stranger's needs before her own. It was increasingly rare in today's world. "Sir," Gregory ventured, "if I may ask, what exactly are you planning?" Harold smiled slightly. "She sacrificed something important to help someone in need. That kind of character deserves recognition. Would you like me to arrange a flight for her? We could easily get her on the morning charter to Minneapolis." "No." Harold shook his head. "That's thinking too small, Gregory, too corporate." He tapped his fingers thoughtfully against the leather briefcase bearing the Midwest Air logo, the same airline he had built from nothing over 40 years ago. "I want to do this personally." Gregory raised an eyebrow, but knew better than to question his boss further. In 15 years, he had learned that Harold Winters rarely did anything without purpose. "Call the hangar," Harold instructed. "Have the Gulfstream ready for tomorrow morning and book us rooms at the airport hotel for tonight. I'm not leaving until I know exactly what we're dealing with." "Us, sir? You're planning to go yourself?" "Of course." Harold's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Some things a man needs to do in person, Gregory. Some debts can only be repaid face to face." As Gregory stepped away to make the arrangements, Harold continued his vigil. The soldier had finally drifted to sleep, her head resting awkwardly against her makeshift pillow. In the sterile environment of the airport terminal, surrounded by indifferent strangers, she looked both vulnerable and strong, a contradiction Harold understood all too well. His mind drifted back to another time, another place, when he had been the one in need, when a stranger's kindness had changed everything. Perhaps this was his chance to close a circle that had remained open for far too long. Harold reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, worn challenge coin, a military memento he'd carried. For over 50 years, he turned it over in his fingers, feeling the familiar weight and texture. "We see each other," he whispered, a mantra from his own military days. "Even when the world looks away." Jessica jerked awake, her heart pounding. For a disorienting moment, she wasn't sure where she was, the fluorescent lights and unfamiliar sounds triggering a flood of adrenaline. Then reality settled back in. Not Afghanistan, just Terminal B at Chicago O'Hare. She checked her watch. 2:17 a.m. She'd only been asleep for a little over an hour. With a sigh, she shifted against the hard wall, trying to find a more comfortable position. The terminal had quieted significantly, with only the occasional announcement breaking the stillness. Sleep wouldn't come easily again. It rarely did these days. Ever since her last tour, nights had become a battlefield of their own, filled with memories she couldn't quite shake and sounds that followed her home. Jessica pulled out her phone and opened her photo gallery, scrolling to a picture of her sister Melissa. It had been taken 2 years ago during Jessica's brief leave between deployments. They were standing arm in arm outside their parents' house, both smiling widely. Melissa was holding up her left hand, showing off her new engagement ring. "I want you to be my maid of honor," Melissa had told her that day. "And no excuses about being deployed. You have to promise you'll be there." Jessica had promised. She'd even timed her discharge from the Army to ensure she would make it back in time. And now, because of a split-second decision to help a stranger, she might break that promise. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Captain Rivera. Her former commanding officer checked in on her regularly since her discharge, more friend than superior now. "Matthews," she answered, keeping her voice low. "Didn't wake you, did I?" Rivera's familiar voice came through the speaker. "No, sir, I was already awake." "Not sleeping again?" Jessica sighed. "Just airport insomnia. I'm stuck at O'Hare overnight." "Thought you were headed to your sister's wedding." "That's the plan. Just hit a snag." She briefly explained the situation. There was a moment of silence before Rivera spoke again. "So you missed your flight because you were helping someone in need? I guess you could put it that way. Sounds like you haven't left the service behind entirely," he said, a smile evident in his voice. "Still running toward the problem when everyone else is running away." Jessica didn't respond immediately. That instinct, to move toward danger rather than away from it, had saved lives in combat. But in civilian life, it sometimes felt like a liability, a piece of military programming she couldn't override. "Your sister will understand," Rivera continued when she didn't speak. "Hell, she'll probably be proud when she hears why you're delayed." "Maybe," Jessica conceded, though she wasn't convinced. Civilians didn't always understand military priorities: duty, service, sacrifice. To them, missing an important family event was just missing an important family event, regardless of the reason. "How's the adjustment going otherwise?" Rivera asked, changing the subject. It was a loaded question. The transition from military to civilian life had been harder than Jessica had anticipated. The structure she had relied on for years was suddenly gone, replaced by a world of choices and uncertainties. Even simple decisions, what to wear, where to eat, how to spend her time, sometimes felt overwhelming. "It's going," she answered, non-committally. "The offer still stands. You know, the security consulting firm would snap you up in a heartbeat." Jessica had been considering the job offer from Rivera's friend, a fellow veteran who ran a private security company. It would put her skills to use, surround her with people who understood the military mindset. But something held her back, a nagging feeling that she needed something different, something that didn't remind her daily of what she'd left behind. "I'm still thinking about it," she said. "No pressure. Just don't wait too long." A pause. "You know, it's normal to feel lost. For a while, we all went through it." Jessica watched as a janitor pushed a cleaning cart across the terminal floor, methodically going about his night shift duties. "I don't feel lost, exactly, just between things. Between military and civilian. Between who you were and who you're becoming," Rivera supplied. "Liminal space. That's what my wife calls it." "Sounds about right." They talked for a few more minutes before saying goodbye. Jessica put her phone away and leaned her head back against the wall. Captain Rivera meant well, but conversations with him always left her feeling more aware of the divide between her military past and uncertain future. She closed her eyes, thinking of Melissa's face when she'd have to tell her she might miss the rehearsal dinner, another promise compromised by duty. Even out of uniform, the pattern continued. Across the terminal, the elderly man was gone. but Jessica could have sworn she still felt his watchful gaze. The terminal slowly came to life as dawn broke, the quiet hum of night giving way to the bustle of morning travelers. Jessica blinked awake, momentarily disoriented by the brightening lights and increasing noise. Her neck ached from the awkward, sleeping position and her mouth felt dry. Not the worst place she'd ever slept, but far from the best. She checked her watch. 5:43 a.m. Her alarm hadn't gone off yet, but the growing commotion around her made further sleep impossible. As she sat up and reached for her water bottle, something caught her eye, an envelope resting on top of her duffel bag. Jessica frowned. She was certain it hadn't been there when she'd fallen asleep. Looking around, she saw no one paying particular attention to her. Cautiously, she picked up the envelope. It was high-quality paper, cream-colored with the Midwest Air logo embossed in the corner. Her name was written on the front in elegant handwriting. Inside was a first-class ticket for a 7:30 a.m. flight to Minneapolis, along with a note on hotel. Stationery Sergeant Matthews, your kindness yesterday did not go unnoticed. Please accept this ticket with my compliments. A car will be waiting at gate C-22 to escort you to the flight. There was no signature, just an elegant W at the bottom. Jessica stared at the ticket in confusion. Who would do this? How did they know? Her name and rank? Her mind immediately went to the elderly man who had been watching her the night before. But why would a stranger go to such trouble? Suspicion battled with relief as she contemplated the unexpected gift. Years in the military had taught her to be wary of situations that seemed too good to be true. Yet the ticket appeared legitimate, and the 7:30 flight would get her to Minneapolis with plenty of time to make it to Rochester for the rehearsal dinner. After a quick trip to the restroom to freshen up as best she could, Jessica gathered her belongings and made her way to gate C-22. She half expected to find no one waiting, the ticket some elaborate prank. Instead, she found a young woman in a crisp Midwest Air uniform holding a tablet with SGT Matthews displayed on the screen. Sergeant Matthews? The woman asked with a bright smile as Jessica approached. I'm Alicia. I'll be assisting you this morning. What exactly is going on? Jessica asked, still clutching the envelope. I'm afraid I don't have all the details, Alicia replied, though something in her expression suggested otherwise. I've just been instructed to ensure you board your flight comfortably. Alicia led Jessica past the regular security line to a private screening area reserved for first class and priority passengers. As they walked, Jessica noticed the deferential nods Alicia received from other airline staff. Whoever had arranged this clearly had significant influence. Your flight will begin boarding in about 40 minutes, Alicia explained as they approached a private lounge. Please help yourself to breakfast while you wait. There's also a shower facility if you'd like to refresh yourself after your night in the terminal. Jessica hesitated at the entrance to the lounge. This is very generous, but I still don't understand. Sometimes good things happen to good people, Sergeant, Alicia interrupted with a knowing smile. Especially when those good people put others before themselves. The implication was clear. Someone had witnessed her helping the elderly passenger yesterday and had arranged this as a thank you. It seemed excessive for such a small act, but Jessica was in no position to refuse. She needed to get to her sister's wedding, and this mysterious benefactor had provided the means. The lounge was nearly empty at this early hour. Jessica took advantage of the shower facilities, grateful to wash away the grime of the terminal floor. Afterward, she helped herself to coffee and a bagel, checking her phone as she ate. She sent a quick text to Melissa, found a flight. We'll make it to the rehearsal dinner after all. See you soon. Her sister's response was immediate. OMG, how? I'm so happy. Jessica smiled, choosing not to explain the strange circumstances. There would be time for that later. At 7:15, Alicia reappeared to escort Jessica to the gate. As they approached, Jessica realized something odd. There were no other passengers waiting to board. Where is everyone? She asked. This is a special flight, Alicia explained vaguely. If you'll follow me. They bypassed the gate desk entirely, walking directly onto the jet bridge. At the aircraft door, Jessica was greeted by a flight attendant, who welcomed her by name. "We're honored to have you with us today, Sergeant Matthews," the attendant said. "Please come aboard." Jessica stepped onto the plane and stopped in her tracks. It wasn't the regular commercial aircraft she'd expected. Instead, she found herself in what appeared to be a private jet, luxuriously appointed with leather seats and wood paneling. "There must be some mistake," she began. "No mistake, Sergeant," the flight attendant assured her. "Please, make yourself comfortable. We'll be departing shortly." As Jessica moved further into the cabin, a sense of unease mingled with her amazement. The only other person present was a middle-aged man in a pilot's uniform checking instruments in the cockpit. "Where are the other passengers?" she asked. The flight attendant smiled. "On this flight, Sergeant Matthews, you are our only passenger." Jessica sat rigidly in the plush leather seat, her military duffel bag placed beside her rather than in the overhead compartment. Old habits died hard. In uncertain situations, keep essential items within reach. And this situation was definitely uncertain. "Can I offer you something to drink before takeoff, Sergeant Matthews?" The flight attendant, who had introduced herself as Diane, stood in the aisle with a professional smile. "Just water, please," Jessica replied, still taking in her surroundings. The private jet's interior was tastefully luxurious without being ostentatious. 8 leather seats were arranged in pairs facing each other with polished wood tables between them. Further back, she could see what appeared to be a small conference area. Of course. Diane poured filtered water into a crystal glass and placed it on the table in front of Jessica. "We'll be taking off shortly. The flight to Minneapolis should take approximately an hour and 20 minutes. Jessica nodded, then asked the question that had been bothering her since she stepped aboard. "Who arranged this? Who's paying for a private jet just for me?" Diane's smile remained fixed. "I believe the captain will address that once we're airborne, Sergeant." The non-answer only increased Jessica's unease. In the military, she'd learned to trust her instincts, and right now, they were sending mixed signals. On one hand, everyone she'd encountered had been respectful and professional. On the other hand, the secrecy surrounding her mysterious benefactor made her suspicious. The plane began to taxi, and Jessica looked out the window as O'Hare's terminal slid past. She pulled out her phone to send a quick text before they took off, then hesitated. Who would she contact? What would she say? "Hey, I'm on a private jet, arranged by someone I don't know," sounded paranoid even to her. Instead, she called her sister. "Jess, did you board your flight?" Melissa answered immediately. "Yeah, I'm on the plane now." "We're about to take off." Jessica kept her voice casual. "Just wanted to let you know I'll definitely make it to the rehearsal dinner." "That's fantastic. How did you manage to find a flight with all the weather issues?" Jessica hesitated. "Someone helped me out. I'll explain when I see you." "Someone? Who?" The call disconnected as the plane accelerated down the runway. Jessica put her phone away, leaning back as the G-forces pressed her into the seat. Within moments, they were airborne, Chicago rapidly shrinking beneath them. Once they reached cruising altitude, Diane returned. "The captain has turned off the fasten seatbelt sign. You're free to move about the cabin. Can I get you anything else?" "Some answers would be nice," Jessica replied, trying to keep the edge from her voice. Diane nodded sympathetically. "I understand your confusion. If you'll give me a moment, I'll see if the captain is ready to speak with you." As Diane disappeared toward the cockpit, Jessica took the opportunity to explore the cabin. The jet was clearly designed for executive best travel, with high-end finishes and technology throughout. On one of the tables, she noticed a magazine featuring Midwest Air's fleet. She picked it up and flipped through it until she found a section on the company's executive leadership. There on the page was a photograph of the elderly man she'd seen watching her in the terminal. Harold Winters, founder and CEO of Midwest Air. The same elegant W from the note adorned his biography. "I see you've been doing some detective work," came a voice from behind her. Jessica turned to find Diane standing in the aisle. "This is his plane, isn't it?" "Harold Winters." "Yes, it is," Diane confirmed. "And he asked me to inform you that we're Not actually headed to Minneapolis, Jessica stiffened. What? Where are we going? Don't worry, Sergeant Matthews. You'll still make it to your sister's wedding, but Mr. Winters would like to meet with you first at his home in northern Wisconsin. It's not far from our original flight path. Jessica's military training kicked in as she assessed the situation. She was essentially trapped on a plane heading to an unknown destination, yet her instincts weren't signaling danger, just confusion and wariness. Why doesn't he just say what he wants? Why all the secrecy? Diane's expression softened. Mr. Winters is particular about how he does things. He was very impressed by what you did yesterday. He rarely takes such a personal interest in anyone. All I did was help an old man who fell. It was nothing special. Perhaps to you, Diane replied. But Mr. Winters sees things differently. He believes actions reveal character, and he values character above all else. Jessica looked out the window at the clouds below. So, I'm supposed to just trust that this stranger with a private jet has good intentions? I've worked for Mr. Winters for 12 years, Diane said. He's eccentric, certainly, but he's a good man. And he's especially fond of veterans. He served in Vietnam himself. That explained the way he had watched her, with the assessing gaze of someone who recognized a fellow soldier. Still, the situation was bizarre by any standard. How long until we land? Jessica asked, resigned to the detour. About 40 minutes. There's a car waiting to take you to Mr. Winters' estate. You'll be there for lunch, and then we'll fly you directly to Rochester afterward. You'll arrive well before the rehearsal dinner. Jessica nodded slowly. I don't have much choice, do I? Diane smiled. You always have choices, Sergeant, but sometimes the unexpected path leads to the most worthwhile destinations. As the plane banked slightly, changing course toward Wisconsin, Jessica wondered what exactly Harold Winters wanted from her and why her simple act of kindness had captured the attention of a billionaire. Harold Winters stood at the window of his study, watching the morning mist rise from Lake Superior. At 78, he still maintained the erect posture instilled in him during basic training over 5 decades ago. His estate, perched on a wooded bluff overlooking the lake, was his sanctuary, a place few were invited to visit. The plane will be landing in 20 minutes, sir, Gregory informed him, entering the room with a tablet in hand. Harold nodded without turning from the window. And her background check? Clean as expected. Distinguished service record. Purple Heart from her second tour when her convoy hit an IED. Excellent performance evaluations throughout. Honorably discharged 4 months ago. Family? Parents still. In Rochester, Minnesota. Father was Army as well, Gulf War veteran. One sister, Melissa, getting married this weekend. That's why Sergeant Matthews was traveling. Harold finally turned to face his assistant. And she has no idea who I am or why I've brought her here? None, sir, though she's undoubtedly curious. Good. Harold moved to his desk and picked up a faded photograph in a simple frame. In it, a much younger version of himself lay on a stretcher, being loaded onto a helicopter. A soldier's face was partially visible in the corner of the frame, features blurred by motion and the camera's limitations. Some debts can never be fully repaid, Gregory, but we must try nonetheless. Gregory had seen the photograph many times over the years, but had never heard the full story behind it. He knew better than to ask directly. Harold Winters revealed pieces of himself on his own schedule, if at all. Will you be joining Sergeant Matthews for lunch, sir? Not immediately, Harold replied, returning the photograph to its place. I want to observe her first. Have Chef prepare something substantial, not too fancy. Military personnel appreciate good food more than pretentious presentation. Of course, sir. As Gregory left to make the arrangements, Harold's mind drifted back to a humid day in 1968, outside a small village near Quezon. He had been a 22-year-old lieutenant then, leading a patrol that had wandered into territory more dangerous than their intelligence had indicated. The ambush had been devastating. Half his men killed in the first minutes, the rest pinned down by heavy fire. Harold had taken shrapnel to his leg and chest, the pain unlike anything he'd experienced before or since, as he'd lain there, certain he was going to die in that foreign jungle. A soldier he barely knew had crawled to his position, dragging him to cover despite the ongoing gunfire. "Not leaving you behind, sir," the man had said, voice steady despite the chaos around them. "Not today." That soldier, Private James Holloway, had risked his life to save Harold's, carrying him nearly a mile to the extraction point despite his own injuries. When the medevac helicopter arrived, there was only room for one more. Without hesitation, Holloway had helped load Harold aboard. "You'll catch the next one," Harold had said. Barely conscious from blood loss, Holloway had just nodded, giving him that particular salute that soldiers in the field used, casual but sincere. "See you stateside, sir." But there had been no next helicopter. The area had been overrun minutes later. Holloway was listed as missing in action, presumed dead. Harold had spent decades searching for information about him, hoping against hope that he'd somehow survived, been taken prisoner, anything but the cold finality of death in a jungle half a world away. He never found James Holloway, but he found purpose in honoring his sacrifice. When Harold returned home and recovered from his injuries, he used his family's modest wealth to start a small charter airline, initially focused on bringing soldiers home from Vietnam more comfortably than military transport. Over the decades, Midwest Air had grown into a major carrier, but Harold had never forgotten its origins or the debt he owed. Every year on the anniversary of the ambush, he anonymously funded programs for veterans. He established scholarships for the children of fallen soldiers. He hired veterans at every level of his company. But it never felt like enough until yesterday, when he'd witnessed Jessica Matthews' selfless act in the airport terminal. Something about her, the unflinching way she'd stepped forward when others stepped back, had reminded him powerfully of James Holloway. Not physically, Holloway had been a stocky white kid from Alabama, nothing like the lean mixed-race woman from Minnesota. But the character, the instinct to help regardless of personal cost, that was the same. For the first time in years, Harold felt the opportunity to repay some small fraction of his debt. Not to Holloway directly, that chance was long gone, but to someone who carried the same spirit of sacrifice. A gentle chime from his desk phone interrupted his thoughts. "Sir," came Gregory's voice, "the plane has landed. The car will be arriving in approximately 15 minutes. "Thank you, Gregory." Harold straightened his tie and glanced once more at the old photograph. "Let's make sure Sergeant Matthews feels welcome." As he left his study to prepare for his guest, Harold touched his pocket where James Holloway's dog tag rested. The only memento recovered from the jungle. Some debts could never be repaid in full, but perhaps they could be honored in ways that mattered. The private jet touched down smoothly on a runway that seemed to materialize out of the dense pine forest. Jessica peered through the window, taking in what appeared to be a small private airstrip with a single hangar and minimal infrastructure. "Welcome to Northwoods Airfield," Diane announced as the plane taxied toward the hangar. "Mr. Winters' estate is about 15 minutes from here." Jessica remained silent, her military training kicking in as she assessed her surroundings and options. She wasn't alarmed exactly, but the strangeness of the situation kept her on high alert. As the plane came to a stop, she gathered her duffel bag and jacket. "There's a car waiting for you," Diane said, opening the cabin door. "Mr. Winters' assistant, Gregory, will escort you to the estate." At the bottom of the stairs, a black SUV idled nearby. A tall man in a tailored suit stood beside it, his posture impeccable. Jessica recognized him as the younger man who had been with Harold Winters at the airport. "Sergeant Matthews," he greeted her with a slight bow. "I'm Gregory Peters, Mr. Winters' executive assistant. Thank you for accommodating this detour in your travel plans." "Did I have a choice?" Jessica asked, adjusting the strap of her duffel bag on her shoulder. Gregory's expression remained neutral. "There are always choices, Sergeant, though some are admittedly more convenient than others." He opened the rear door of the SUV. "Please, allow me to take your bag." Jessica shook her head. I've got it, thanks. She kept the bag with her as she climbed into the vehicle, a habit formed during deployments. Never separate from your gear. The interior of the SUV was luxurious but understated, with leather seats and privacy glass separating the front and rear compartments. Gregory took the driver's seat and started down a narrow paved road that cut through the dense forest. "So, are you going to tell me what this is all about?" Jessica asked after a few minutes of silence. Gregory met her eyes briefly in the rear view mirror. "Mr. Winters prefers to explain himself in person. I can tell you that he was very impressed by your actions yesterday." "All I did was help an old man who fell," Jessica said, repeating what was becoming her mantra. "Anyone would have done the same." "But they didn't, did they?" Gregory's voice was gentle but pointed. "Everyone else walked past. You were the only one who stopped." Jessica looked out the window at the passing trees. She wasn't comfortable with praise for what she considered basic human decency. In the Airline military, you never left someone behind. It was ingrained in every aspect of training and culture. The civilian world's indifference still shocked her sometimes. "How much farther?" she asked, changing the subject. "Just ahead," Gregory replied. The forest opened up to reveal a sprawling property set on the edge of what appeared to be Lake Superior. The main house was a modern interpretation of a lodge, with large windows and natural stone elements that blended harmoniously with the surrounding landscape. It was impressive without being ostentatious, the home of someone with wealth who didn't feel the need to flaunt it. As the SUV pulled up to the main entrance, Jessica's wariness returned. She'd heard stories of wealthy eccentrics and their odd whims. What exactly did this man want from her? "Mr. Winters has arranged lunch," Gregory said as he opened her door. "Afterward, he'll ensure you reach Rochester in plenty of time for your sister's rehearsal dinner. And if I want to leave now," Gregory gestured to the SUV, "then I'll drive you back to the airfield immediately, and the plane will take you directly to Rochester. As I said, Sergeant, there are always choices." Something in his calm assurance eased Jessica's concern slightly. She nodded and followed him into the house. The interior was as tasteful as the exterior, open spaces, comfortable furniture, and walls lined with bookshelves. Large windows framed spectacular views of the lake and surrounding forest. It felt more like a comfortable retreat than a billionaire's showplace. "Mr. Winters will join you shortly," Gregory said, leading her to a sunroom where a table was set for lunch. "Please make yourself comfortable. There are refreshments on the sideboard." Jessica remained standing after Gregory left, moving to the windows to survey the property. Military habits died hard. Always know your exits, always understand the terrain. The estate appeared to be isolated, with a long driveway leading back to the main road. The lakeside offered another potential route if necessary, though she doubted she'd need escape plans from a lunch invitation. On a side table, she noticed a collection of framed photographs. Most showed a much younger Harold Winters in various settings, breaking ground on buildings, shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. One photo caught her attention. Winters in military dress uniform, standing at attention beside an aircraft. "Vietnam, 1967, came a voice from the doorway. Before everything changed, Jessica turned to find Harold Winters watching her from their entrance to the sunroom. In person, he seemed both frailer and more commanding than he had in the terminal. His eyes, bright and alert, studied her with that same assessing gaze she'd noticed the night before. "Sergeant Jessica Matthews," he said, his voice steady despite his age. "Thank you for coming. We have much to discuss." Jessica stood at attention instinctively before catching herself. Old habits. "Mr. Winters," she acknowledged with a nod. "Please sit." Harold gestured to the table. "And call me Harold. We can dispense with formalities." Jessica took a seat, watching as the elderly man lowered himself carefully into the chair across from her. Despite his age, there was a military precision to his movements that she recognized immediately. 10th Mountain Division, Harold said, nodding toward her. 3 tours in Afghanistan, Purple Heart recipient, honorable discharge 4 months ago. "You've done your homework," Jessica replied, unsurprised but still wary. "I like to know who I'm dealing with." Harold poured water from a crystal pitcher. "Just as you were trying to learn about me by studying those photographs." A server appeared silently, placing bowls of soup before them before disappearing again. The rich aroma of beef and vegetables filled the air. "My chef makes an excellent beef barley soup," Harold said. "Simple food, well prepared. I've found that those of us who've seen combat often prefer straightforward meals to fussy cuisine." Jessica couldn't argue with that. She picked up her spoon, hunger overriding caution. The soup was indeed excellent. "I imagine you have questions," Harold continued after a few moments of silence. "Several," Jessica agreed, "starting with why you brought me here." Harold set down his spoon and leaned back slightly. "Do you recognize me from anywhere besides the airport terminal last night?" Jessica shook her head. "I saw your photo in the magazine on the plane, founder and CEO of Midwest Air, but we've never met before." "No, we haven't," Harold confirmed, "but our paths crossed nonetheless. You see, I was the man you helped yesterday." Jessica's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "That's not possible. The man I helped was at least 10 years older than you, heavier, set, with a full beard." Harold smiled faintly. "An associate of mine. I found that when I want to observe the true operations of my airline, it's better if no one knows who I am. I was nearby watching everything. I saw you drop your bags without hesitation when he collapsed. I saw you miss your flight to stay with him until medical help arrived. Anyone would have." "No," Harold interrupted firmly. "Anyone wouldn't have. Everyone else walked past. Some even looked annoyed at the inconvenience. You were the only one who stopped, the only one who sacrificed something important to help a stranger?" Jessica shifted uncomfortably under his intense gaze. "It wasn't a big sacrifice. Your sister's wedding rehearsal isn't important. Of course it is, but a man's health is more important." Harold nodded slowly, as if she'd confirmed something significant. "That kind of prioritization, putting others' needs above your own comfort, it's increasingly rare, especially in civilian life." The server returned, removing their soup bowls and replacing them with plates of roasted chicken, vegetables, and potatoes. "I was a lieutenant in Vietnam," Harold continued after the server departed. "In 1968, my patrol was ambushed near Khe Sanh. I took shrapnel to the chest and leg. By all rights, I should have died there." Jessica remained silent, recognizing that Harold was sharing something significant. "A private in my unit, a man I barely knew, crawled through enemy fire to reach me. He dragged me nearly a mile to the extraction point, despite being wounded himself. When the medevac arrived, there was only room for one more. He put me on that helicopter." Harold's voice remained steady, but his eyes had grown distant. "He was listed as MIA, presumed killed. His name was James Holloway." Harold reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn military dog tag, placing it on the table between them. "This was all they recovered. I've carried it for 50 years. Jessica looked at the dog tag, understanding beginning to dawn. "And you think I remind you of him? Of what he did?" "The circumstances are different," Harold acknowledged. "But the character, the instinct to help, regardless of personal cost, that's the same." He met her eyes directly. "When I saw what you did yesterday, it was like seeing James again. A chance to repay a debt I've carried for half a century. I don't need repayment," Jessica said quietly. "And I'm not James Holloway." "No, you're not," Harold agreed. "But you are someone who understands that some things matter more than personal convenience or comfort. That's increasingly rare in today's world." He took a sip of water before continuing. "I built Midwest Air from nothing after I returned from Vietnam. Initially, it was just a small charter service focused on bringing soldiers home comfortably. It grew beyond my expectations, but I never forgot its origins or why I started it." Jessica studied the elderly man across from her, seeing him now, not just as a wealthy CEO, but as a fellow soldier carrying the weight of his past. "So you arranged a private jet and brought me to your home just to say thank you for helping someone?" she asked, still finding the situation surreal. "Not exactly," Harold replied with a small smile. "The thank you is sincere, but I have something more specific in mind, something that might benefit us both." which is, I'm going to make sure you get to your sister's wedding, not just the ceremony, but today's rehearsal dinner too. And then, if you're interested, I'd like to discuss your future. Jessica's guard went back up. My future? Midwest Air has a foundation for veterans. We need someone to lead it, someone who understands both military and civilian worlds, someone with integrity and compassion, someone like you. Jessica stared at him, speechless. In the space of 24 hours, she had gone from sleeping on an airport floor to being offered what sounded like an executive position by a billionaire. "You don't know me," she finally said. "I know enough," Harold replied simply. "I know what you did when you thought no one was watching. That tells me more about your character than any resume ever could." Jessica set down her fork, food momentarily forgotten as she processed Harold's unexpected offer. "A foundation for veteran?" she asked. Harold nodded. "Midwest Air has always prioritized hiring veterans, but I want to do more. The foundation provides employment assistance, housing support, educational opportunities, and mental health resources. It's well-funded, but needs leadership from someone who truly understands what veterans face." "And you think that's me? Based on one interaction?" Harold's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "Sometimes one moment reveals more than 1,000 interviews could." He gestured to their surroundings. "I didn't build all this by making poor judgments about people's character." A server appeared to clear their plates, replacing them with coffee and a simple dessert of fresh berries and cream. When they were alone again, Harold rose from his chair with a slight stiffness that betrayed his age. "Come with me, I'd like to show you something." Jessica followed him through the house, to a study lined with bookshelves and military memorabilia. Unlike the ostentatious "I Love America" displays she'd seen in some civilians' homes, these items were personal and authentic. Worn combat boots under glass, a carefully folded flag, medals in simple frames rather than gaudy displays. Harold moved to a glass cabinet and opened it, removing a weathered helmet with a visible dent on one side. "This saved my life in Khe Sanh," he said, handling it with reverence. "Standard issue M1 helmet. Doesn't look like much compared to what you had in Afghanistan, I imagine." "The basics haven't changed as much as you'd think," Jessica replied, taking the helmet when he offered it. She turned it over in her hands, noting the faded name Winters H written inside. "The weight of responsibility feels the same in any era." Harold nodded, pleased by her understanding. "Different wars, same burdens." He pointed to a framed photograph on the wall, a group of young men in jungle fatigues, arms around each other's shoulders, faces a mixture of exhaustion and forced bravado. "My unit, 2 days before the ambush. James Holloway is third from the right." Jessica studied the image, seeing a stocky young man with a wide grin and watchful eyes. "He looks young." 19, Harold confirmed. "I was 22 and thought I knew everything. Lieutenant Fresh, out of ROTC." He shook his head. "I learned more about leadership in those jungles than in any classroom." "That never changes," Jessica said. "No amount of training prepares you for the real thing." "Your commanding officer spoke highly of you," Harold remarked. "Captain Rivera, in particular, mentioned your ability to keep your team focused under pressure." Jessica raised an eyebrow. "You spoke to Rivera this morning?" "He said you're the kind of leader who walks point when the situation is dangerous and takes the rear when it's not." "That tells me everything I need to know." Jessica moved around the study, examining the collection that chronicled Harold's life. Military photographs gave way to early aviation ventures, then the growth of Midwest Air from a small charter service to a major airline. "You've maintained your connection to the military throughout your business career," she observed. "It's the foundation of everything I've built," Harold replied. "The discipline, the focus on mission completion, the understanding that people's lives depend on you doing your job correctly. Those lessons served me well in business." Jessica stopped at a more recent photograph showing Harold with a group of men and women in wheelchairs, all wearing medals around their necks. "Warrior Games 2019, Harold explained. "Midwest Air sponsors several teams and provides transportation." for participants and their families. That's the kind of work the Foundation handles. Jessica nodded, understanding now why her simple act of helping a stranger had resonated so deeply with this man. For Harold Winters, the connection between military service and civilian responsibility had never been broken. The transition is harder than most civilians understand, she said quietly, almost to herself. Tell me, Harold prompted, settling into a leather armchair and gesturing for her to take the one opposite. Jessica hesitated, unused to discussing her feelings about leaving the military. But something about Harold's direct gaze, the understanding of someone who'd walked a similar path, made it easier. Everything's different, she began. In the military, your purpose is clear. Your team is defined. The hierarchy tells you exactly where you stand. Then suddenly you're a civilian and none of those structures exist anymore. Harold nodded. And civilian employers don't always understand what veterans bring to the table. Exactly. They see infantry on a resume and think it means you can only shoot things or follow orders. They don't see the leadership, the problem-solving under pressure, the ability to work with diverse teams toward a common goal. That's precisely why the Foundation needs someone like you at the helm, Harold said. Someone who can translate between these two worlds. Jessica sipped her coffee, considering. I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Winters. Harold, he corrected. And this isn't charity, it's an exchange of value. You bring skills and perspective the Foundation needs. The Foundation offers you purpose and the resources to help others like yourself. He leaned forward. But we can discuss that more after your sister's wedding. For now, we should prepare to get you to Rochester. Jessica checked her watch, surprised at how quickly time had passed. The rehearsal dinner is at 7 p.m., Harold finished for her. You'll be there with hours to spare. My pilot is already preparing the plane. As they rose to leave the study, Jessica paused at the photograph of Harold's unit in Vietnam. Did you ever find out what happened to him, to James Holloway? Harold's expression softened. Not definitively. He was listed as missing in action. His family received the standard letters, the memorial service with an empty casket. I've spent decades trying to piece together what might have happened after that helicopter took off with me in it. That's a heavy weight to carry for 50 years. Some debts can never be fully repaid, Harold said quietly, but we honor them by how we live. James gave me a future. I've tried to make it count for something. As they walked back through the house toward the main entrance, Gregory appeared with impeccable timing. The jet is being prepared, sir, he informed Harold. It will be ready for departure in 30 minutes. Thank you, Gregory, Harold replied. Has everything else been arranged as discussed? Yes, sir. All details have been confirmed. Jessica glanced between the two men, sensing there was more to this exchange than the simple logistics of her flight to Rochester. What details? She asked. Harold smiled. Nothing sinister, I assure you. Just ensuring you arrive at your sister's wedding in appropriate style. Before Jessica could press further, Gregory handed her a slim folder. Your updated itinerary, Sergeant Matthews. The plane will take you directly to Rochester International Airport, where a car will be waiting to take you to your parents' home. Jessica opened the folder to find a meticulously detailed schedule, complete with contact information for her drivers and confirmation of her arrival time. This is very thorough, she said, impressed despite herself. Gregory excels at logistics. Harold noted with obvious pride. He could probably run a military campaign more efficiently than the Pentagon. Gregory's expression remained professional, but Jessica caught a flicker of appreciation at the compliment. There's one more thing, Harold added. I've taken the liberty of having some suitable attire delivered to your parents' house for the rehearsal dinner and the wedding. Jessica's wariness returned. That's really not necessary. I packed everything I need. I'm sure you did, Harold said diplomatically. Consider it an additional option, nothing more. If you prefer your own clothes, by all means, wear them, Jessica nodded, though she remained skeptical. The idea of this man, still practically a stranger, selecting clothes for her, was uncomfortable. Yet nothing in his manner suggested ulterior motives, just an old-fashioned desire to be helpful in his own way. As they reached the foyer, Harold gestured to a comfortable seating area. "We have a few minutes before we need to leave for the airfield. Perhaps you'd like to call your sister and let her know you're on your way?" Jessica realized she hadn't checked her phone in hours. She pulled it out to find several text messages from Melissa, increasingly anxious about her whereabouts. "I should probably do that," she agreed, stepping away for privacy. Melissa answered on the first ring. "Jess, where are you? I've been texting you for hours." "Sorry, Mel. My phone was on. Silent. I'm in Wisconsin, but I'm about to board a flight to Rochester. I'll definitely make it to the rehearsal dinner." "Wisconsin? What are you doing there? I thought you were in Chicago." Jessica hesitated, unsure how to explain her bizarre detour. "It's complicated. I'll tell you everything when I see you. The important thing is, I'll be there in plenty of time. Promise." Because Mom is already stress baking and Dad's doing that thing where he paces and checks his watch every 2 minutes. "I promise," Jessica said firmly. "Save me some of Mom's stress cookies?" Melissa laughed, tension easing from her voice. "I'll try, but Tyler's already demolished most of them. His pre-wedding jitters manifest as carb loading." After a few more minutes of reassurances, Jessica ended the call and rejoined Harold, who was speaking quietly with Gregory. "Everything all right?" "With your sister?" Harold asked. "Yes, just anxious about the wedding." "Standard bride stuff." Jessica studied him curiously. "You never mentioned if you have family. Children who might take over the airline someday?" A shadow passed briefly over Harold's face. "No children. I married late in life to a wonderful woman who already had grown children of her own. Elizabeth passed away 8 years ago." "I'm sorry," Jessica said sincerely. Harold acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "Her children and grandchildren are part of my life, but they have their own careers. The airline will eventually transition to employee ownership. I've made arrangements." Gregory discreetly checked his watch. "Sir, we should depart for the airfield if Sergeant Matthews is to maintain her schedule." The drive back through the forest was quieter than their earlier journey. Jessica found herself contemplating Harold's unusual offer. The foundation position would give her purpose, meaningful work helping other veterans. Yet the circumstances of the offer were so strange that she couldn't help questioning it. "I can practically hear you thinking, Sergeant," Harold remarked from the seat beside her. Jessica smiled slightly. "Just processing everything. 24 hours ago I was sleeping on an airport floor. Now I'm in a billionaire's SUV after being offered a job running his foundation." "Life rarely moves in predictable straight lines," Harold observed. "Via Mug, most important junctions often appear without warning. In the military, we're trained to be suspicious of situations that develop too quickly or seem too good to be true." Harold nodded approvingly, a healthy caution. "I'd be concerned if you weren't questioning all of this." He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a business card with just his name and a phone number. "Take all the time you need to consider my offer. Enjoy your sister's wedding. Do your research on me and the foundation. Call me when you're ready to discuss it further, whether that's next week or next month." The simplicity of this approach reassured Jessica more than any elaborate promises could have. It suggested confidence rather than desperation, a genuine desire to find the right person rather than just fill a position quickly. As the SUV pulled onto the airstrip, Jessica could see the Gulfstream waiting, its engines already running. A weekend flight attendant, not Diane from earlier, but a young man in a crisp uniform, stood at the base of the stairs. "Your chariot awaits," Harold said as Gregory opened the car door. "Give your sister my congratulations on her marriage." "You're not coming?" Jessica asked, surprised. "Not this time. You don't need an old man intruding on your family celebration. Besides," he added with a small smile, "I have a foundation to prepare for its new leadership, assuming you accept my offer." Jessica shouldered her duffel bag. "Thank you for, well, everything. This has been the strangest day of my civilian life so far." "Sometimes the strangest days are the beginning of the best chapters," Harold replied. "Safe travels, Sergeant Matthews." Jessica settled into the plush leather seat of the Gulfstream, still trying to process the whirlwind events of the past 24 hours. The flight attendant, who had introduced himself as Michael, had shown her to the same seat she'd occupied on the journey from Chicago. "We'll be taking off momentarily, Sergeant Matthews," Michael informed her. "The flight to Rochester will take approximately 45 minutes. Can I get you anything before we depart?" "Just water, thanks," Jessica replied, her mind still lingering on her conversation with Harold Winters. As Michael moved toward the galley, Jessica noticed someone else boarding the plane. To her surprise, Harold himself appeared in the cabin doorway, followed by Gregory, carrying a small overnight bag. "Change of plans?" Jessica asked as Harold took the seat across from her. "A slight adjustment," Harold acknowledged with a small smile. "I realize there were a few more things we should discuss before you decide about the foundation position. The flight to Rochester seems like a good opportunity." Jessica studied him, noting a subtle tension in his posture that hadn't been present at the estate. "Is that the only reason?" Harold glanced at Gregory, who had taken a seat toward the rear of the cabin and was already focused on his tablet. "Perceptive," he murmured. "No, that's not the only reason. The truth is, I rarely leave my estate these days. When I do, it's usually for board meetings or medical appointments." He adjusted his cufflink, a nervous gesture that seemed out of character for him. "But our conversation about James Holloway stirred something. I've spent decades honoring his memory through the work I do, but always at a distance." The plane began to taxi, and Harold paused as Michael delivered Jessica's water and offered refreshments to the others before taking his seat for takeoff. "You mentioned having family in Rochester?" Jessica prompted once they were airborne and the seatbelt sign had been turned off. "Elizabeth's son lives there with his family," Harold confirmed. "I haven't seen them in person for nearly 2 years. Phone calls and video chats aren't the same." "No, they're not," Jessica agreed, thinking of her own video calls with her family. During deployments, technology connects, but it doesn't replace being present. Harold nodded. "Precisely. After our conversation about what truly matters, about sacrifice and connection, I realized I've been using my age and health as excuses to withdraw from the world." He gestured around the luxurious cabin. "It's easy to surround yourself with comfort and convenience until you've built your own gilded cage." Jessica understood better than Harold might have expected. The months since her discharge had been filled with a similar kind of withdrawal, not into luxury, but into isolation. It was easier to avoid social situations than to navigate the exhausting complexity of civilian interactions. "Does your family know you're coming?" she asked. Gregory called ahead. "They're surprised, but pleased." Harold's expression softened. "My granddaughter, Elizabeth's granddaughter, technically, but I've never made that distinction, is about your age. She's a teacher in Rochester. She's been asking me to visit for months." "Family is important," Jessica said, thinking of her own parents and sister. "It's one of the hardest parts of military service, being away from them for so long that you sometimes feel like a stranger when you return." "That distance can happen without deployment too," Harold reflected. "I built an airline that connects people across the country, yet I've allowed myself to disconnect from the people who matter most." Their conversation was interrupted as Michael approached with a tray of sandwiches and fruit. "A light meal for the journey, sir. We'll be landing in approximately 30 minutes. As they ate, Harold shifted the conversation to Jessica's family. "Tell me about your sister, the bride-to-be." Jessica smiled, relaxing slightly. "Melissa's 3 years younger than me. She's a physical therapist. Actually, she works a lot with veterans at the VA hospital in Rochester. That's where she met Tyler, her fiancé. He's a recreational therapist there." "A healing family," Harold observed. "You serve in combat. She helps those who return. I never thought of it that way, but I guess you're right." Jessica looked out the window at the clouds below. "Melissa's always been the fixer in the family. When we were kids, she was constantly bringing home injured animals and nursing them back to health. It was no surprise when she chose her career." "And your parents?" "Dad was Army like me. He served in the first Gulf War. Mom's a high school counselor retiring this year. They've been in Rochester their whole lives." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "A family with deep roots and a tradition of service, both military and community." That explains a lot about you, Jessica raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Values are inherited and cultivated, Harold said. Your instinct to help that man in the airport, that doesn't develop in isolation. It comes from somewhere. Jessica hadn't considered this before. Her family had never made a big deal about service. It was simply expected. You helped when help was needed. You showed up when you were called. These weren't heroic acts deserving of praise. They were basic obligations of being human. What about you? She asked. What values shaped your life before Vietnam? Harold looked surprised by the question, as if few people asked him about his life before success. My father was a mechanic who became a pilot during World War II. He taught me that how you do anything is how you do everything, that excellence isn't selective. My mother was a teacher who believed education was the greatest equalizer. Both emphasized integrity above all else. Jessica could see those influences in how Harold had built his company and in his foundation's focus on education and employment for veterans. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, announcing their initial descent into Rochester. Harold looked out the window at the landscape below. I haven't been to Minnesota in nearly a decade, he remarked. Elizabeth loved it here, said the people were genuine in a way that's increasingly rare. That's Minnesota, Jessica agreed, with a small smile. We're pathologically nice, but it's usually sincere. As the plane began its descent, Jessica realized she felt more at ease with Harold now than during their time at his estate. There was something humanizing about seeing him reconnect with his own past and family, a reminder that beneath the billionaire exterior was a man still wrestling with the same questions of purpose and connection that she faced. The Gulfstream touched down smoothly at Rochester International Airport, a stark contrast to Jessica's usual experience of commercial flights with their jolting landings and cramped conditions. Through the window, she could see a black SUV waiting on the tarmac, similar to the one at Harold's estate, but with Minnesota license plates. Your transportation is ready, Gregory announced, looking up from his tablet. And I've confirmed that the items you requested were delivered to the Matthews residence 2 hours ago. Harold nodded approvingly. Excellent. And the other arrangements? All in place, sir. Jessica glanced between them, once again feeling like there were plans in motion that she wasn't fully aware of. Before she could ask, Michael opened the cabin door, and the cool Minnesota air rushed in. Thank you for flying with us, Sergeant Matthews, he said with practiced courtesy. We hope you enjoy your sister's wedding. As Jessica descended the stairs with her duffel bag, she noticed the driver standing beside the SUV wasn't a hired professional, but a man in his mid-60s wearing jeans and a flannel shirt under a worn leather jacket. He broke into a wide smile when he saw her. Dad? Jessica quickened her pace, surprised to see her father waiting instead of the chauffeur she'd expected. Robert Matthews embraced his daughter tightly. There's my soldier, he said, his voice rough with emotion. It was their ritual greeting since her first deployment, 2 simple words that carried the weight of pride, worry, and relief. I thought a car service was picking me up, Jessica said, pulling back to look at him. Her father seemed older than when she'd last seen him 6 months ago, the lines around his eyes deeper, his hair more gray than brown now. Got a call saying, you were arriving by private jet, Robert explained, eyeing the Gulfstream with undisguised curiosity. Figured this was something I needed to see for myself. Your mother's about to burst with questions, Jessica laughed. I bet she is. She turned as Harold and Gregory descended the stairs. Dad, this is Harold Winters. He's the reason I'm arriving in style instead of stuck at O'Hare. Robert straightened almost imperceptibly, one veteran recognizing another. Mr. Winters, he said, extending his hand. Robert Matthews, thank you for helping my daughter. Harold shook his hand firmly. The pleasure was mine, Mr. Matthews. Your daughter helped someone in need when no one else would. I merely returned the favor. Robert's expression shifted from polite gratitude to keen interest. Is that so? He glanced at Jessica with unmistakable pride. Gregory efficiently directed the unloading of Harold's overnight bag and a garment bag that Jessica assumed contained the clothing Harold had mentioned. Earlier, everything was transferred to the Matthews SUV, a 10-year-old model that had seen better days but was meticulously maintained. "You're welcome to follow us back to the house," Robert offered. "My wife's got enough food prepared to feed half." "The state. It's what she does when she's anxious." "We wouldn't want to impose," Harold began, but Robert waved away his concern. "Any friend of Jessica's is welcome. Besides," he added with a knowing look, "I get the feeling there's more to this story than a simple favor." The drive from the airport to the Matthews home took about 15 minutes, passing through Rochester's orderly streets with their mix of modern medical facilities, evidence of the Mayo Clinic's influence, and traditional Midwestern neighborhoods. Jessica sat in the front passenger seat beside her father, while Harold and Gregory occupied the back. "So," Robert said, glancing at Jessica, "private jet, huh? You've moved up in the world since your last email." Jessica smiled at her father's deliberate understatement. "It's been an interesting 24 hours. I gathered that. Your mother's been stress baking since dawn. When you didn't answer your phone this morning, she was convinced you were stranded. Or worse." "I should have called earlier," Jessica admitted. "Things happened pretty quickly." Robert nodded, understanding in his eyes. Military families developed a particular relationship with worry, learning to live with it as a constant companion, without letting it consume them. As they turned onto Meadow Lane, Jessica felt the familiar tug of homecoming. The Matthews house was a 2-story colonial with white siding and dark green shutters, set back from the street on a generous lot with mature maple trees. It wasn't grand or luxurious, but it was impeccably maintained, a testament to her father's mechanical precision and her mother's attention to detail. Before Robert had even put the car in park, the front door flew open and Catherine Matthews appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on an apron dusted with flour. "They're here," she called over her shoulder, presumably to Melissa, before hurrying down the steps. Jessica barely had time to exit the vehicle before her mother enveloped her in a tight hug that smelled of cinnamon and home. "You had us worried sick," Catherine scolded, though her relief overshadowed any real anger. She pulled back to examine her daughter with a mother's assessing gaze. "You look tired. Have you been eating properly?" "Yes, Mom," Jessica replied with the automatic response of children everywhere. Catherine's attention shifted to the other passengers emerging from the SUV. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Harold in his tailored suit and Gregory with his impeccable posture. "Mom, this is Harold Winters and his assistant Gregory Peters," Jessica said. "They're the reason I made it here on time." Catherine's Midwestern hospitality immediately kicked in. "Well, thank you for bringing our daughter home safely. You must come in for coffee at least. I've just taken an apple cake out of the oven." Harold smiled warmly. "That's very kind of you, Mrs. Matthews. We'd be delighted." As they approached the house, the front door opened again to reveal Melissa, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, her face flushed with excitement. "Jess," she exclaimed, rushing down to embrace her sister, "you made it! And who are these? Distinguished gentlemen?" Jessica laughed at her sister's characteristic enthusiasm. "It's a long story." "All the best ones are," Melissa replied with a grin, looping her arm through Jessica's as they walked toward the house. "And you're going to tell me every single detail." From the corner of her eye, Jessica caught Harold watching their reunion with a wistful expression, a man remembering what it meant to be part of a family gathering. Despite her lingering questions about his motives, she found herself glad he had decided to come. "Welcome to Minnesota," she said to him as they reached the porch. "Hope you're ready for interrogation by Midwestern nice." Harold chuckled. "After Vietnam and corporate boardrooms, I think I can handle it." The Matthews living room was a testament to family history. Comfortable furniture, slightly worn at the edges, walls adorned with photographs chronicling decades of birthdays, graduations, and military ceremonies. Harold sat on the sofa, a slice of apple cake on a plate balanced on his knee, listening as Jessica gave her family an abbreviated version of the past 24 hours. "So you missed your flight because you were helping someone who'd collapsed?" Melissa asked, perched on the arm of a recliner, where her fiancé Tyler sat quietly observing the scene. That's so you, Jess." "It wasn't a big deal," Jessica insisted for what felt like the dozenth time. "It was to the man you helped," Harold interjected, "and to those of us who witnessed it." Catherine Matthews returned from the kitchen with fresh coffee. "Well, we can't thank you enough for making sure Jessica got here, Mr. Winters. The rehearsal dinner tonight wouldn't be the same without her. Please, call me Harold," he replied, accepting the coffee with a nod of thanks. "And I'm happy to have played a small part in reuniting your family." Robert, who had been studying Harold with the measured assessment of one veteran sizing up another, finally spoke. "Midwest Air. I remember when it was just starting up, specialized in bringing Vietnam vets home, didn't it?" Harold looked surprised. "You have a good memory, Mr. Matthews. That was indeed how we began, though it was a much smaller operation then." "Robert served in Desert Storm," Catherine explained proudly. "He pays attention to companies that support veterans." A look of understanding passed between the two men, recognition of shared values, if not shared experiences. "Jessica mentioned you've offered her a position with your foundation," Robert continued. Jessica shot her father a look of mild exasperation. She'd intended to discuss that privately with her family after the wedding. "A preliminary conversation only," Harold said diplomatically. "Your daughter has much to consider, including whether she wants to work with a demanding old man who arranges kidnappings via private jet." The room erupted in laughter, breaking the subtle tension that had been building. "Speaking of the rehearsal, dinner," Melissa interjected, checking her watch. "We need to be at the venue by 6 to meet with the wedding planner for last-minute details. That gives everyone about 3 hours to get ready." "I should find a hotel," Harold said, beginning to rise. "Nonsense," Catherine declared firmly. "We have a perfectly good guest room. You and Mr. Peters are welcome to stay here." Gregory, who had been quietly observing from a corner, looked mildly alarmed at the prospect of staying in a family home rather than a luxury hotel. "That's very generous," Harold replied, "but we wouldn't want to impose, especially with wedding preparations underway." "It's no imposition," Catherine insisted, with the authority of a mother accustomed to having the final word. "Besides, the hotels are all booked with out-of-town wedding guests." Harold glanced at Gregory, who gave a subtle nod of resignation. "Then we accept your hospitality with gratitude," Harold said. As the group dispersed to prepare for the evening, Catherine showing Harold and Gregory to the guest room, and Melissa dragging Tyler upstairs to change, Jessica found herself alone with her father in the living room. "He's not what I expected," Robert observed, collecting empty cake plates. "From a billionaire?" Jessica asked. "From someone who sends private jets for strangers." Robert studied his daughter. "What's his angle?" Jessica smiled at her father's protective instinct. "That was my first question, too. But I think he's sincere. He sees something in what I did that connects to his own past. Something about service and sacrifice." Robert nodded slowly. "Vietnam changed a lot of men in a lot of different ways. Some came back broken. Others came back determined to build something meaningful." He placed a hand on Jessica's shoulder. "Just be careful. The world outside the military isn't always straightforward." "I know, Dad." Jessica covered his hand with her own. "But I think this might be a good opportunity. The foundation does important work for veterans." "Then consider it carefully," Robert advised. "But not tonight. Tonight is for your sister." 3 hours later, the Matthews home buzzed with pre-dinner activity. Jessica stood in her childhood bedroom, examining herself in the full-length mirror on the back of the door. The suitable attire Harold had arranged turned out to be a simple but elegant navy blue dress that fit her perfectly, somehow both appropriate for a rehearsal dinner and comfortable enough that she didn't feel like an imposter in her own skin. A soft knock at the door interrupted her self-assessment. "Come in," she called. Melissa entered, resplendent in a pale pink dress, her blonde hair now arranged in an intricate updo. "Wow, sis," she said, circling Jessica with an appraising eye. "You clean up nice. Is that the dress Mr. Winters sent?" Jessica nodded. "How did you know?" "Mom told me. She's impressed, by the way. Says he has excellent taste." Melissa sat on the edge of the bed. So, private jets and billionaire admirers. Your life got interesting fast. It's not like that, Jessica protested. He's old enough to be our grandfather. I didn't mean romantically interesting, Melissa clarified with a grin. Though that would make a great story. I meant the job offer. Are you going to take it? Jessica sighed, sitting beside her sister. I don't know yet. It seems like a good fit, but the whole situation is so strange. Strange doesn't mean bad, Melissa pointed out. Sometimes the best opportunities come from unexpected places. She bumped Jessica's shoulder with her own. Like me meeting Tyler while volunteering at the VA. True, Jessica conceded. I just need time to think it through. Well, think fast. Opportunities like this don't come along every day. Melissa stood and smoothed her dress. Now, come on. Tyler's parents just arrived, and I need my big sister for moral support. His mother has opinions about everything. As they headed downstairs, Jessica was struck by how normal everything felt despite the extraordinary circumstances that had brought her home. The familiar rhythms of family life, her mother's fussing, her father's quiet strength, Melissa's energetic presence, grounded her in a way nothing else could. In the foyer, Harold waited with the rest of the family, looking distinguished in a dark suit that complemented the Matthews' more modest formal wear without overshadowing it. Jessica noticed that he'd taken care to fit in rather than stand out, a courtesy that spoke volumes about his character. Ready for the Inquisition? Her father asked with a wink as he helped Catherine with her coat. As ready as I'll ever be, Jessica replied, reaching for her own wrap. Harold moved to assist her, holding the shawl with unexpected gentleness. Your sister looks very happy, he observed quietly. You've given her a wonderful gift by being here. Jessica met his gaze in the hall mirror. Thank you for making that possible. No, Harold replied with a slight smile. Thank you for reminding an old soldier what truly matters. The rehearsal dinner passed in a whirl of introductions, toasts, and the particular brand of familial chaos that accompanies wedding preparations. Jessica observed with quiet amusement as Harold, billionaire CEO and hardened Vietnam veteran, navigated the social complexities of a Midwestern pre-wedding gathering with unexpected ease. He chatted with Tyler's grandfather about fishing, discussed education reform with Catherine's fellow teachers, and even endured Tyler's mother's detailed explanation of her gluten sensitivity with perfect patience. By the time the family returned home that night, exhausted but happy, Jessica had almost forgotten the extraordinary circumstances that had brought Harold into their lives. He seemed to fit naturally into their world, his wealth and status overshadowed by his genuine interest in the people around him. The wedding day dawned clear and crisp, a perfect October Saturday in Minnesota. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock at a historic church in downtown Rochester, with the reception to follow at a renovated barn venue just outside the city. Jessica woke early, military habits persisting despite the occasion. She found her father already in the kitchen, coffee brewed, reading the newspaper at the table. Morning, soldier, he greeted her without looking up. Morning, Dad. She poured herself coffee and joined him. Where is everyone? Your mother took Melissa to her hair appointment. Tyler's staying with his parents. And your mysterious benefactor is out for a walk. Left about 30 minutes ago. Robert folded the newspaper and studied his daughter. You've got a big day ahead as maid of honor. Jessica nodded, sipping her coffee. The responsibilities of the day stretched before her, helping Melissa dress, managing last-minute emergencies, delivering a toast at the reception. Normal civilian concerns that somehow felt more daunting than planning a patrol route through hostile territory. You'll do fine, Robert said, reading her thoughts with the accuracy of a parent who had watched his child grow through every phase of life. It's just a different kind of mission. Jessica smiled at the military analogy. Roger that. They sat in comfortable silence until the back door opened and Harold entered, his cheeks ruddy from the morning chill. Good morning, he greeted them. Hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all, Robert replied, rising to pour another cup of coffee. Jessica and I were just preparing our strategy for wedding day operations. Harold accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. Military precision for civilian celebrations. Wise approach. He turned to Jessica. I spoke with Gregory this morning. He's arranged for my departure tomorrow. I'll be attending the wedding, but leaving early the next day. So soon? Jessica asked, surprised by her own disappointment. I have some matters to attend to back in Wisconsin. Besides, he added with a gentle smile, this is family time. I'm grateful to have been included for even a portion of it. The rest of the morning passed in a flurry of activity. By early afternoon, Jessica found herself in a small antechamber of the church, helping Melissa with the final touches of her wedding ensemble. The bride was radiant in a classic A-line gown, her nervous energy manifesting in continuous small adjustments to her veil. Stop fidgeting, Jessica admonished gently, batting her sister's hands away from the delicate tool. You look perfect. I'm scared, Melissa admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, not of marrying Tyler, but of everything changing. Jessica recognized the vulnerability in her sister's eyes, the same uncertainty she had felt upon leaving the structured world of the military. Some changes are worth the fear, she said, straightening Melissa's necklace. And you're not doing it alone. Tyler's a good man, and you'll always have family behind you. Melissa hugged her sister tightly, careful not to disturb either of their carefully arranged appearances. I'm so glad you made it home for this. I don't know what I would have done if you'd missed it. Funny how things work out, Jessica replied, thinking of Harold and his unexpected intervention. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. When it was time for the ceremony, Jessica took her place at the front of the church beside the other bridesmaids. From her position, she could see her parents in the front pew, her mother already dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, her father sitting straight-backed and proud. A few rows behind them sat Harold, his expression thoughtful as he observed the gathering. The music swelled, and the church doors opened to reveal Melissa on their father's arm. A collective murmur of appreciation rippled through the congregation as the bride began her procession down the aisle. Jessica felt a surge of emotion watching her little sister, the girl who had once followed her everywhere, demanding to be included in every adventure, now stepping confidently toward her future. Robert's face, as he escorted his younger daughter, was a study in controlled emotion, pride and joy tempered by the bittersweet acknowledgement that things were changing. When they reached the altar, he placed Melissa's hand in Tyler's with a formal dignity that belied the slight tremor in his fingers. Who gives this woman to be married? The minister asked. Her mother and I do, Robert replied, his voice steady as he took his seat beside Catherine. Jessica caught her father's eye and gave him a subtle nod, acknowledgement of a duty well performed. He returned the gesture with the faintest smile. Before taking Catherine's hand in his, the ceremony proceeded with traditional solemnity, vows exchanged, rings presented, promises made. Jessica stood at attention beside her sister, holding the bouquet during the ring exchange, her military bearing unconsciously asserting itself in this ceremonial role. When the minister pronounced Tyler and Melissa husband and wife, the church erupted in applause. The newlyweds turned to face their guests, radiant with happiness. In that moment, Jessica felt a profound sense of rightness, as if all the strange twists of the past few days had been leading precisely to this point, ensuring she would witness her sister's joy. As the wedding party recessed down the aisle, Jessica glanced at Harold in the congregation. He was watching the proceedings with misty eyes, a man remembering his own wedding, perhaps, or reflecting on the passages of life he had witnessed. When their gazes met briefly, he gave her a small nod of acknowledgement, one soldier to another, recognizing the importance of being present for the moments that matter. Outside the church, amid the swirl of rice-throwing and congratulations, Jessica found herself standing slightly apart, observing the celebration with the perspective of someone newly returned to civilian life. The rituals and traditions that had once seemed routine now appeared in a different light after years spent in war zones where everyday certainties could never be taken for granted. It's different when you come back, isn't it? Came Harold's voice beside her. Everything familiar seems somehow new. Jessica nodded, unsurprised by his perception. Like seeing your hometown through a stranger's eyes. The readjustment never quite ends, Harold observed, watching as Melissa and Tyler posed for photographs. But days like this help anchor us to what matters. The reception venue was transformed by twinkling lights and autumn flowers, the renovated barn maintaining its rustic charm while accommodating the elegant celebration. Round tables surrounded a wooden dance floor, and tall windows offered views of the surrounding countryside painted in October's vibrant colors. Jessica sat at the head table between her parents and the other members of the wedding party, watching as guests mingled during the cocktail hour. Harold had been seated at a table with some of Catherine's colleagues from the high school, a deliberate placement by her mother, who had quickly assessed that the billionaire preferred substantive conversation to small talk. The DJ announced. Dinner service and conversations quieted as waitstaff began serving the meal. Jessica picked at her food, mentally rehearsing the toast she would give later. Public speaking had never bothered her in the military. Briefing commanding officers or addressing her unit had been routine. But this was different, more personal, more revealing. Nervous? Her father asked quietly, noticing her distraction. A little, Jessica admitted. I want to get it right for Melissa. You will, Robert assured her. Just speak from the heart. That's all she wants. After the main course was cleared, the best man, Tyler's brother Jason, rose to deliver his toast. His speech was heartfelt, if somewhat rambling, filled with childhood anecdotes and gentle teasing about Tyler's meticulous nature. The guests laughed and applauded appreciatively when he concluded by welcoming Melissa to their family. Then it was Jessica's turn. She stood, glass in hand, and the room fell silent in anticipation. For those who don't know me, I'm Jessica, Melissa's sister, and the person who taught her how to throw a proper punch when Tommy Wilson pulled her pigtails in 3rd grade. A ripple of laughter moved through the audience. Sorry, Mrs. Wilson, Jessica added, nodding toward an older woman who waved good-naturedly. Melissa and I grew up sharing everything. Rooms, clothes, secrets. The only thing we never had to share was our parents' love, which somehow multiplied rather than divided between us. Jessica glanced at Catherine and Robert, who were watching her with proud smiles. When I joined the Army, one of my biggest fears wasn't about the dangers I might face, but about the moments I would miss back home. Birthdays, holidays, graduations. I missed Melissa's college graduation because I was in Afghanistan. I missed her first day as a physical therapist because I was at training. Jessica paused, her gaze finding Melissa, who was listening intently, eyes bright with unshed tears. But yesterday, I almost missed this wedding, not because of deployment, but because of a simple choice at an airport. A stranger needed help, and I was raised to believe that when someone needs help, you stop whatever you're doing and you help them. I learned that from our parents, and Melissa learned it too. It's why she became a physical therapist, dedicated to helping veterans rebuild their lives. She raised her glass slightly. I almost missed this wedding because of that choice. But then something extraordinary happened. Another person, a stranger who witnessed that small act of kindness, made sure I got here. Jessica's eyes found Harold, who looked momentarily startled at being referenced. Sometimes we think the world doesn't notice or care about small acts of kindness. But sometimes it does. Sometimes one act of service creates a ripple that comes back to us in unexpected ways. She turned back to the newlyweds. Melissa and Tyler, your relationship is built on that same foundation of noticing what others need and responding with compassion. You both dedicate your professional lives to helping those who've served our country. But more importantly, you show that same care and attention to each other every day. Jessica raised her glass higher. To Melissa and Tyler, may your marriage be filled with small acts of kindness that create ripples of joy for decades to come, and may you always have people in your lives who make sure you don't miss the moments that matter. The guests applauded warmly as Jessica sat down, receiving a tearful hug from Melissa. That was beautiful, her sister whispered. Thank you. As dinner concluded and the dance floor opened, Jessica found a moment to slip outside for some fresh air. The evening was cool but not cold, the sky clear and filled with stars visible away from the city lights. She breathed deeply, enjoying the momentary solitude. "That was quite a toast," came Harold's voice as he stepped onto the porch beside her. "Eloquent and meaningful." "Thank you," Jessica replied. "I'm not usually good with words." "I disagree. You communicated exactly what needed to be said." Harold leaned against the porch railing. "Your family is remarkable, Jessica. The connection between you all, the values you share, it's increasingly rare." "They're just regular people," Jessica said with a shrug. "Doing their best, like everyone." "Else?" Harold shook his head. "There's nothing just about it. What you consider normal, the way you support each other, the instinct to help without expectation of return, that's extraordinary in today's world." Before Jessica could respond, the DJ's voice carried from inside, announcing the father-daughter dance. Harold gestured toward the door. "You should go back in. These are the moments you came here for." Jessica nodded and started toward the door, then paused. "Will you join us?" "In a moment," Harold promised. "I'd like to watch the stars a little longer. At my age, you develop an appreciation for beauty that younger people often miss in their hurry." Inside, Jessica watched as her father led Melissa onto the dance floor. Robert Matthews moved with surprising grace for a man who claimed to have 2 left feet, guiding his younger daughter through a simple waltz while guests looked on with affection. When the song ended, the DJ invited all fathers and daughters to join the next dance. Catherine nudged Jessica gently. "Go on. Your dad's waiting for you too." Jessica made her way to the dance floor where Robert stood, hand extended. "May I have this dance, Sergeant Matthews?" he asked with formal courtesy. "You may, Sergeant Matthews," she replied, using his old rank. As they joined the other father-daughter pairs circling the floor, Jessica noticed Harold had returned and was watching from the sidelines. His expression held a wistful quality, a man observing joy he appreciated but couldn't fully share. Then, to her surprise, an elderly woman approached Harold and said something that made him smile. After a brief conversation, he offered his arm and led her onto the dance floor. Jessica recognized her as Catherine's mother, her grandmother, who had traveled from Florida for the wedding. "Would you look at that?" Robert remarked, following Jessica's gaze. "Your billionaire friend has charmed Grandma Betty." "He's not my billionaire friend, Dad," Jessica protested, but without conviction. "Maybe not yet," Robert replied with unexpected insight. "But I think he sees in you something he values, something worth investing in." As the music played on, Jessica considered her father's words. Perhaps there was truth in them. Perhaps Harold Winters, isolated by wealth, age, and experience, had recognized in her simple airport act not just kindness, but a quality he wanted to nurture in the world he would eventually leave behind. The DJ's voice broke into her thoughts. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked by someone special to make an announcement." The dance floor cleared as the DJ continued. "Mr. Harold Winters would like to say a few words to the newlyweds." A murmur of curiosity rippled through the guests. Most knew only that Harold was some important business associate of the Matthews family, invited at the last minute. Jessica felt her father's hand tighten slightly on her shoulder as they moved off the dance floor. Harold made his way to the small stage, his posture straight despite his age. The DJ handed him a microphone, and he surveyed the room with the calm confidence of someone accustomed to addressing crowds. "First, I want to thank the Matthews family for their extraordinary hospitality," Harold began. "As many of you know, I'm a last-minute addition to this celebration, and yet I've been welcomed as if I were family." He nodded toward Catherine and Robert, who stood near Jessica at the edge of the dance floor. "I met Jessica Matthews just 2 days ago at Chicago O'Hare Airport. I witnessed her miss her flight to this wedding because she stopped to help a stranger in distress." Harold's gaze found Jessica in the crowd. That simple act of kindness, putting someone else's needs above her own convenience, moved me deeply. It reminded me of values I've tried to uphold throughout my life and business career. Jessica felt the eyes of the wedding guests turning toward her, and she resisted the urge to shrink from the attention. When I learned that her missed flight might prevent her from attending her sister's wedding, I had the means to help. And so I did, not as charity, but as recognition of character worth honoring. Harold turned toward Melissa and Tyler, who were watching with interest from their seats at the head table. In my 78 years, I've learned that the foundation of a successful marriage is the same as the foundation of a meaningful life: service to others. Melissa and Tyler, you both demonstrate that principle in your careers, helping veterans rebuild their lives. Your commitment to service is evident not just in your work, but in how you treat each other and those around you. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. In honor of that commitment and with appreciation for the Matthews family's gracious welcome, I'd like to offer a small gift. Harold descended from the stage and approached the newlyweds, handing the envelope to Tyler. This is a trust fund established in your names at Rochester Community Bank. It's designed to provide you with financial security as you begin your life together, allowing you to focus on your important work rather than economic pressures. Tyler opened the envelope with trembling fingers, his eyes widening as he read the enclosed document. He showed it to Melissa, whose hand flew to her mouth in shock. This is too generous," Tyler stammered, looking up at Harold. Harold shook his head. "It's an investment in two people who understand what truly matters in life." He turned back to address the entire gathering. "And there's one more announcement I'd like to make, with the bride and groom's permission." Melissa nodded, still speechless. The Midwest Air Veterans Foundation is establishing a new rehabilitation center here in Rochester, in partnership with the VA hospital where Melissa and Tyler work. This center will specialize in innovative physical and recreational therapy for veterans, exactly the kind of work that both of you do so well. A buzz of excitement ran through the room, particularly among the guests who worked in healthcare. And Harold continued, his gaze finding Jessica again. "I'm hoping that the center's leadership might include someone who understands both military service and compassionate action. Someone like Jessica Matthews, should she be interested in such a position." Jessica felt her mother's hand slip into hers, squeezing gently in support. The public nature of the offer, so different from their private conversation at Harold's estate, made it clear that this wasn't charity or a casual opportunity. It was a deliberate investment in values Harold wanted to perpetuate. To the newlyweds, Harold concluded, raising a champagne glass that someone had handed him, "May your marriage reflect the same commitment to service that defines your professional lives. And may you always remember that kindness, once given, often returns in unexpected ways." The guests applauded enthusiastically as Harold returned to his seat, the DJ quickly transitioning to an upbeat song to resume the celebration. But the mood had shifted, an undercurrent of amazed conversation rippling through the reception as people processed what had just happened. Melissa broke from the head table and hurried to Jessica, pulling her into a corner for a private moment. "Did you know about this?" she demanded, her eyes wide with disbelief. "The trust fund?" "No," Jessica replied honestly. "He mentioned a job offer, but nothing about a new center here in Rochester." "Jess, do you realize what this means? If you take this position, you'd be back home. We could work together, maybe even in the same facility." Melissa clutched her sister's hands. "Please tell me you're considering it." Before Jessica could respond, Tyler joined them, still looking stunned. "The trust fund is substantial," he said quietly. "Life-changing. We could buy a house, start a family without worrying about student loans or mortgages." "You deserve it," Jessica told them sincerely. "Both of you do such important work." "So do you," Melissa insisted. "And now you have a chance to continue it here, close to family." She searched Jessica's face. "That's what you've been missing since you came home, isn't it? Purpose, a mission." Jessica couldn't deny it. The month since her discharge had felt directionless, the structure and clarity of military life replaced by civilian ambiguity. The foundation position would give her that sense of purpose back, not in combat, but in helping those who had served transition to civilian life, something she understood intimately. "I'm definitely considering it," she assured her sister. "Consider it from nearby," Melissa pleaded, "not from some apartment in a city where you don't know anyone." Their parents approached, Catherine's eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Did I hear correctly?" she asked. "You might be moving back to Rochester?" "It's a possibility," Jessica acknowledged, suddenly overwhelmed by her family's hopeful expressions. Robert placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "No pressure, soldier. You make the decision that's right for you. We'll support you either way," Jessica nodded gratefully, glancing across the room to where Harold sat conversing with Tyler's father. The elderly billionaire seemed completely at ease in this middle-class Midwestern wedding, his wealth and status forgotten, as he engaged genuinely with the people around him. When he caught Jessica watching him, he gave her a small nod, not of expectation, but of understanding. The decision would be hers to make, in her own time. The opportunity was offered without strings or pressure. For the first time since leaving the military, Jessica felt the weight of uncertainty lifting slightly. She had options now, a potential path forward that would use her skills and experiences in meaningful ways, a chance to be near family while still serving a mission larger than herself. As the reception continued around her, Jessica realized that Harold's gift wasn't just the job offer or the new rehabilitation center. It was the gift of possibility, of a future that honored both her military past and her civilian present. 1 year later, Jessica Matthews adjusted her blazer as she walked through the sliding glass doors of the Midwest Air Veterans Rehabilitation Center. The crisp October air gave way to the welcoming warmth of the lobby, where a mural depicting service members from various eras covered one wall. At the reception desk, a young veteran with prosthetic legs greeted her with a smile. "Morning, Director Matthews." "Morning, Carlos. How's the new prosthetic working out?" "Night and day difference," he replied enthusiastically. "Your sister's adjustments made all the difference. I actually ran yesterday, well, jogged really, but still." Jessica nodded, pleased. "That's fantastic. Make sure you tell her during your session today. She lives for that kind of feedback." As she continued through the facility, Jessica exchanged greetings with staff and patients alike. After a year as the center's director, she knew each of them by name, their stories, their struggles, their small victories. The rehabilitation center had quickly become a model facility, combining physical therapy, mental health services, job, training, and community reintegration programs all under one roof. Her office overlooked the physical therapy area, where Melissa was already working with a Marine recovering from spinal surgery. Jessica watched her sister's patient guidance for a moment before turning to her desk, where a stack of grant proposals awaited her review. A text message alert drew her attention to her phone. Landing at 11:30. Gregory sending car. HW Jessica smiled. Harold's monthly visits had become a highlight for everyone at the center. Despite his age and the demands of running his airline empire, he remained deeply involved in the Foundation's work, particularly at the Rochester facility. At he was 79, Harold Winters had experienced a remarkable renewal of purpose in the past year. The isolation that had characterized his later years had given way to active engagement, not just with the Foundation, but with the Matthews family, who had embraced him as one of their own. He'd attended Sunday dinners, celebrated holidays, and even joined Robert for fishing trips to northern Minnesota. Jessica's phone rang, the direct line that only a few people had access to. "Matthews," she answered. "Jessica." Harold's voice sounded weaker than usual. "I'm looking forward to seeing the center today." "We're looking forward to having you," she replied, noting the fatigue in his tone. "Everything all right?" "You sound tired?" "Just the usual complaints of old age," he dismissed. "Nothing that seeing the progress at the center won't remedy." After they hung up, Jessica turned to the window again, watching the veterans in various stages of recovery, working through their physical therapy routines. Some used specialized equipment donated by Harold's Foundation. Others worked with therapists using techniques developed specifically for combat-related injuries. The center had exceeded everyone's expectations, becoming a nationally recognized facility in just 12 months. What had begun as a simple act of kindness in an airport had blossomed into something that was changing hundreds of lives. At precisely 11:45, Gregory escorted Harold into Jessica's office. The elderly man moved more slowly than he had a year ago, leaning slightly on a polished cane, but his eyes remained sharp and observant. "Jessica," he greeted her warmly as she rose to meet him. "Harold." She embraced him gently, noting with concern how thin he felt beneath his impeccably tailored suit. "Welcome back. It's good to be here," he replied, easing himself into a chair. "Gregory tells me the new virtual reality therapy program is showing remarkable results. 17% improvement in PTSD symptom reduction compared to traditional methods," Jessica confirmed, taking her seat across from him. "Tyler's team is publishing their findings next month," Harold nodded with satisfaction. "And your sister's innovative prosthetic adjustments being implemented at 3 other VA facilities already." Their conversation continued in this vein, discussing programs, reviewing outcomes, planning improvements. It was their routine, established over months of collaboration. But today, Jessica sensed something different in Harold's manner, a certain finality in how he spoke about future projects. "I'd like to visit the garden," Harold said, when they'd finished reviewing the quarterly reports. "Before lunch, if possible." Jessica nodded, understanding the request. The memorial garden had been Harold's specific request when designing the facility, a peaceful space dedicated to fallen service members from all conflicts. At its center stood a simple stone monument engraved with words from a poem about sacrifice and remembrance. They walked slowly through the facility, Harold pausing occasionally to speak with veterans and staff members. Many greeted him by name, some with the respectful nod one veteran offers another. Though few knew the details of his service in Vietnam, they recognized in him a fellow soldier. In the garden, autumn had painted the trees in brilliant colors. Harold made his way to a particular bench, one with a small plaque bearing the name James Holloway. "I have something for you," Harold said as they sat, reaching into his jacket pocket to withdraw a worn military dog tag on a chain. "This belonged to the man who saved my life in Vietnam. I've carried it for over 50 years. Jessica stared at the offered item. "Harold, I can't accept that. It's too personal, too important to you." "That's precisely why I want you to have it," he insisted. "The burden of remembrance shouldn't die with me. Someone should know his name, his sacrifice." He pressed the dog tag into her palm. "James would have liked you, Jessica. You share the same instinct to help, regardless of personal cost." She accepted the dog tag with the reverence it deserved, understanding that Harold was entrusting her with more than metal. He was passing on a sacred obligation of memory. "The Foundation Board meets next week," Harold continued, his gaze fixed on the memorial stone. "They'll be ratifying the leadership transition. You'll have full autonomy over the Rochester Center with expanded authority across all Foundation initiatives." Jessica looked at him sharply. "Transition? You never mentioned stepping back." Harold smiled faintly. "Even I must acknowledge the march of time, my dear. Gregory has my medical test results. The prognosis is limited." "How limited?" Jessica asked, her voice steady despite the sudden ache in her chest. "Months, rather than years." Harold's tone remained matter-of-fact. "But I've had a good life, Jessica. Longer than James got. Longer than many who served." He patted her hand. "And this past year has been among my best. Seeing this center, watching you build something meaningful, being welcomed by your family. It's been a gift I never expected in my final chapter." Jessica swallowed hard against the emotion rising in her throat. In just 1 year, this man had become important to her. Mentor, friend, and in some ways a second father. The thought of losing him struck deeper than she had anticipated. "Does my family know?" she asked. "Not yet. I thought you should hear it first." Harold's expression softened. "They've been remarkably kind, including an old soldier in their lives, as if I belonged there. You do belong, Jessica said firmly. You're family now, whether you intended to be or not. Harold nodded, visibly moved by her declaration. After a moment of silence, he straightened his shoulders with military precision. Well, enough of that. We have work to discuss, and I'd like to see your sister's new aquatic therapy program before lunch. As they rose to continue their tour, a young woman in a wheelchair entered the garden, navigating the paved path with confidence. Jessica recognized. Her is Marie Dawson, a recently admitted Army veteran recovering from injuries sustained in a training accident. Ms. Dawson, Jessica greeted her. Have you met Mr. Winters? He's the founder of this center. Marie looked up, recognition dawning in her eyes. Mr. Winters? Harold Winters of Midwest Air? Harold nodded, extending his hand. A pleasure to meet. You, Specialist Dawson. Marie's expression shifted to one of disbelief. Sir, my grandfather served with you in Vietnam. James Holloway was my grandfather. The world seemed to stop. Harold stared at the young woman, his face draining of color. That's not possible. James Holloway was listed as MIA, presumed killed in action. He had no family. He was captured, Marie explained, her voice trembling slightly. Spent 2 years in a POW camp before escaping. Made it to a village where a local family hid him until the end of the war. He had injuries that prevented him from returning to service, and by then, he'd fallen in love with the daughter of the family that saved him, my grandmother. Harold sank slowly back onto the bench, his legs suddenly unable to support him. He survived? James survived? Yes, sir. He passed away in 2008, but he talked about you often. The lieutenant he saved, who was loaded onto the last helicopter. Marie reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a faded photograph. He kept this all those years. The photograph showed a much younger Harold in a hospital bed, bandaged but alive, with a handwritten note on the back. Lieutenant Winters made it home. Mission accomplished. Jessica watched as Harold cradled the photograph, tears flowing freely down his weathered cheeks. 50 years of wondering, of carrying the weight of a debt he could never repay, and now this remarkable closure, this revelation that his rescuer had lived a full life after all. He named my father Harold, Marie continued softly, and when I joined the Army, he told me to remember that sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen without anyone watching. Harold looked up at the young woman, the living legacy of James Holloway, and then at Jessica, who had demonstrated that same principle in an airport terminal 1 year ago. Sometimes, he agreed, his voice rough with emotion, but sometimes the world is watching. And sometimes one act of kindness creates ripples that continue for generations. As they sat together in the autumn garden, Harold, Jessica, and the granddaughter of the man who had saved Harold's life half a century earlier, the circle that had begun in a distant jungle seemed to close at last. 3 generations of service, sacrifice, and unexpected connections brought together by the enduring power of one simple principle. When someone needs help, you help them. Jessica clasped the dog tag in her palm, understanding now that she wasn't just carrying on Harold's work with the foundation. She was part of something larger, a continuous chain of service and remembrance that stretched backward through time and forward into the future. Full circle, Harold whispered, almost to himself. After all these years, full circle.